Hello, and welcome to the 5th episode of Autopsy of a Writer. As always, I am your host, Brad Witzlefeld. Today we have a second part of our How to Write series as we explore world building. Yes, world building before character creation, and I'll explain why shortly. First off, what is world building? Well, it's a rather complex question. World building could mean creating an entire fantasy world for some writers. For others, it could simply be research into a time period or a place, or both for that matter. You see, world building depends on the genre you want to write. Is your story a fantasy story about magic and dragons, dwarves and elves? Or is your story about a soldier struggling to survive in the trenches of World War I? The first decision you had to make, your concept, should have informed you what genre you were going to be writing in. I know what you're thinking, but Brad, why didn't you do a video on genre before getting to this point? Well, quite frankly, I forgot. And there are so many different genres and subgenres, I could probably spend an episode on each one, and that would about cover a year's worth of episodes. Come to think of it, that might not be a bad idea for when I get done with the How to Write series. Well, I'll shelve that for later. Anyway, if you're curious about genre, I'll put a link in the description below so that you have something to go and look at least. Anyway, back to world building. For those of you writing realistic fiction, historical fiction, or something related, your world building is going to likely be focused solely on research of the era and the locations in which your story takes place. This is by no means less important than the world building a fantasy or science fiction author would do. In fact, it's probably more important because your story is based on something real. If you get the details wrong, more people are going to know. Do not rush through the process of world building. Spend plenty of time compiling your research on the era, focusing on clothing, music, technology, societal norms, how people talk, especially the slang words. Your story depends on authenticity, so make sure you take plenty of time to find what you need. For those of you who want to create your own fantasy or space worlds, your world building might seem more complex, and in some ways it is, but it is no more or less important than it was for the people writing about the real world. World building is critical to the believability of a story, and if you fail to spend enough time on it, your story will ultimately fail as well. For the purpose of this how-to video, I'm going to focus on science fiction world building, both as an exercise for me and because you can apply the principles to just about every genre that exists. So let's say I'm writing a science fiction story about a young man who grew up in an ice mining colony. One day an explosion rocks the facility and many people are lost to the vacuum of space, but our hero manages to seal off the area and has to work with several others to keep the facility from losing power and get a signal back to Earth that they need rescue while finding a way to feed them even though the mess hall and storage is on the other side of the facility through the destroyed section. That's a concept. So what about the world building? Well, part of the concept mentioned Earth, so we know there are likely humans involved. Part of world building is defining what species of beings are involved. For some people that means creating species, which is a fun thing to do, but sometimes rather difficult as you often need to write a short story about each race in order to define them, their racial characteristics, their society, etc. It's not that easy, and one of the things people forget to do is to add dissidents into their species. They often make the entire species homogeneous and agree on everything. That's one-dimensional and makes a species seem boring and like a piece of scenery more than actors. Anyway, once you've figured out what your races are, in this case we're going to say they are only human and make this a hard sci-fi story rather than space opera. So the difference between hard sci-fi and space opera is space opera oftentimes involves magic, elements of fantasy. So Star Wars is space opera. So our hero is human. This informs part of character design, which is our next topic. I prefer to do things this way because the focus remains more on the story than on the characters. Good characters will add to the story, but a bad story will make good characters seem lackluster. What next? Well, we know that the colony is on an ice moon. There are a couple of these in our solar system, and it seems logical that we could develop colonies on them in the future for ice mining. Europa is the most popular choice because more people have heard of it, or Triton. But let's say we want to be different. We'll pick Saturn's moon, Enceladus, instead. So we've picked a location, but what does that location tell us? Well, it's a moon of Saturn, as already stated, but it's also the brightest celestial body in our solar system aside from the sun. Why? Because the entire surface of the moon is covered in ice, and hydrothermal vents puncture through the ice to give off heat into space, creating a sort of corona around it. These hydrothermal vents ascend through the saltwater ocean beneath the ice. Remember that explosion mentioned in the concept? What if it was a hydrothermal vent rupturing through the ice that wasn't predicted and it blew through the colony? No sabotage. This is a natural disaster story. This informs us about the world itself. For fantasy writers, you'll probably be creating this all yourself. Define oceans, rivers, forests, plains, mountain ranges, and the like. I highly recommend trying to draw a crude map of where things are. You don't have to publish it, but it'll help you keep areas separated so you don't accidentally say something is near something in one spot that you say it is far away from somewhere else. So we have the macro level defined. What about the smaller scale? Well, the smaller scale, as defined in the concept, is the colony itself. I mentioned that the storage and mess are on the other side of the blown-up segment from where the survivors are, which means that we could probably say it's a linear design. But is it a design of helical pods? Is it still a long line of tube-like structures? Each could have an impact on the story. I'd end up saying you have a series of long tube corridors connecting different pods together in a line, with each pod serving a different purpose. For everyone else, the microscale is focused on cities, villages, farms, locations of inns along major thoroughfares, things of that nature. But what about society? People don't just exist in a vacuum. There's always a society involved. Different religions for different people, that creates conflict between them that must be resolved so that they either work together or they fight it out and one loses. Different backgrounds of economic status, someone who is rich on earth being the boss of someone that was poor, or vice versa. Do you have kings and queens, or is there a president? Is there any government left at all? What language or languages do they speak? For our world, the main hero could be a Christian working alongside several Muslims and atheists, and how he has to work with them could not only change his perspective on them, but their perspective of him. That could be a pretty good story given today's current climate. Let's also say that Earth has developed to the point where there's only one government, and there are so few people left that they all basically live in a few small cities with English as the primary language. How does that inform the importance of surviving the catastrophe? Well, losing the ice mine could doom humanity to extinction, especially if we say that Triton and Europa are already depleted. This facility is the last hope for keeping humanity alive until a new solution can be found. It would have a huge impact on the story. And food, too. How do people eat in the colony? Hydroponics? What if that part of the station was a section destroyed by the blast? How does that change the story? Will people starve to save those on Earth? What if it was merely the next section over and damaged but not destroyed? Is there less intensity to the story? What about clothing? Do they have access to EVA suits that will allow them to go out into the zero-atmosphere environment? Or do they have to survive without food? Do the knights in your fantasy story wear leather armor, or are they all clothed in steel? Or mithril, or some other element that you create as part of your world building? Every little detail of the world can have an influence on the story. If you don't work it out from the beginning, how will you be able to work out where your characters fit into the story? How would you figure out the main character's background without knowing this information? So that's world building in a nutshell. It's going to differ depending on your genre. If you have a magic system, then world building also includes defining the rules and limitations of that system. You'll have to vary your world building based on your concept. But that about covers it. Next time we're going to talk about characters and how to develop them. I know I said that at the end of the last episode, but I got flustered and said the wrong topic and didn't catch myself. My bad. This time I really mean it, though. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and then hit the bell so you get notified when I upload new videos. Also hit that thumbs up button so I know you like the video, and drop a comment below if you want more information. Hope you all have a nice day, and remember, write on.